Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you, members of the media. Well, we've just returned. Our full delegation is back. As you know, a delegation representing the interests of Trinidad and Tobago, which included Foreign Minister Senator Dennis Moses, Minister for CARICOM Affairs, Minister Stuart Young, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, and Minister in the Office of the Attorney General, Chief Secretary of London, and MP Prakash Ramada formed the basic unit supported by our technical teams. We had a very hectic and successful visit to Jamaica, initiated largely in response to an invitation by an invitation from the Prime Minister of Jamaica, who had raised with me when we first met in Belize, and indicated to me that the situation in Jamaica with respect to the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica was deteriorating, and if it was left unattended, could result in some very undesirable consequences for Trinidad and Tobago and for Jamaica. And I accepted an invitation to visit Jamaica so as to be able to better put Trinidad and Tobago's position to Jamaicans, to whom certain misunderstandings and misrepresentations were advanced from certain quarters. It's important to note that if this kind of development had been allowed to remain unattended, it could have fed right back to Trinidad and Tobago, where our productive capacity could have been finding challenges with respect to the outlets from our factories, and that would certainly have threatened the jobs of persons who are employed in these factories, not to mention the losses that would have occurred. And it's the kind of thing where once it begins to fester, it becomes more and more difficult to cauterize later on. So our visit to Jamaica was one where we were prepared to present to Jamaicans Trinidad and Tobago's position in the matter of free movement within CARICOM. And at the level of the heads of government in Georgetown, this matter came up. And we discussed at length the requirement for citizens of our region, governed under the Chaguaramas Treaty, to be properly informed as to the conditions under which the so-called free movement of citizens exists. Yes, we have substantial free movement in the region, but there are some conditions where that movement could be restricted. And insofar as Trinidad and Tobago has had to restrict the movement of some persons into Trinidad and Tobago, we had to defend our actions and stand by our laws and our officers, but at the same time, we have taken steps to ensure that we are not in the wrong with respect to how we treat people arriving in Trinidad and Tobago. So this was the main matter which initiated my visit to Jamaica. And I'm pleased to say that when I got there, the people who were particularly aggrieved and who were the mouthpieces for this matter and who were the influence makers, we were able to speak face to face with them and very clearly outline our position in the context of our commitments under the Chaguaramas Treaty. And they understood very clearly. And we left Jamaica with the understanding that this matter is now behind us. We also understand that there are great opportunities that can replace these threats. And we took the opportunity for the days that we were there to engage in high-level discussions on a number of other matters, which would put Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in the position that we really want to be in CARICOM, which are leaders of CARICOM setting a good example for the rest of the union, and also to carry out the commitments that we've made at heads of government level and the many commitments which are lying in the CARICOM Secretariat unattended. And many of these came up as issues of interest today. And the condition of having two new prime ministers in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica allowed us to discuss these matters from a reset standpoint, where we are able to look at them a little more dispassionately. And at the level of the heads of government, for example, something like the single market and economy, we have already taken the steps to have a review done as to where we are at with the matters of work that has already been done and work to be done and on what matters. We also had the opportunity to interface with another, I don't want to say troubling, but another eyebrow-raising development when we were informed that Jamaica had put in place a committee to review Jamaica's relationship with CARICOM. Immediately, I presume, given our historical antecedents, that development was the subject of extensive discussion in some quarters, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in Jamaica itself, and outside of Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, where it was being seen as though something is developing here which could have some very far-reaching consequences. So we took the opportunity to meet with this committee, which is headed by former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, one of the more experienced Caribbean parliamentarians and a Prime Minister of not too distant past. And those discussions were extremely valuable to us, the Trinidad and Tobago delegation, because we were able to get a clear understanding as to exactly what the terms of reference were for this committee. And we had some very valuable discussions with former Prime Minister Golding and his team. And we discussed at length Caribbean Airlines in the context of air transport and the role of Air Jamaica in Caribbean Airlines and the expectations of Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago as shareholders in this airline. We discussed the possibility of developing some proper understanding of reintroducing proper inter-island sea transport in the region, and also some pathways by which we can pursue these two areas of air transport and sea transport to improve the whole question of interregional travel, the very thing that initiated the discussions in the first place. We're now talking about looking to see how we can improve the ability of our citizens to do business by moving from island to island more easily. And also we discussed the issues of our security services cooperating more closely, and we met with the heads of the Jamaican security services there, and certain things have been put in place for further contact. In short, out of this meeting has come a face-to-face interaction of Jamaica's leaders and Trinidad and Tobago's leaders. We met with their leaders in the business community, their Chamber of Commerce, the Manufacturing Association, the Defense Services, Foreign Affairs. And I can tell you that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Jamaica, they have a clear pathway and a work program to follow along the lines of what I discussed. Also, the whole question of the Attorney General's office in Jamaica and the Attorney General's office in Trinidad and Tobago, where a number of things will have to be done to advance what we have been discussing in terms of carrying out our CARICOM commitments, as well as making adjustments in our local laws to regionalize some actions which have to take place. We also had the opportunity to spend the day with the management and the top administration of the University of the West Indies at Mona. And that has been particularly useful because we were able to get an insight as to what is happening with respect to the University of the West Indies, what is current and what is forward-looking, and also what it holds for our students who are now there and who might go there in greater numbers in the future. And also, we were able to get a first-hand presentation from all the campus heads by Skype technology. We had a conference where I was able to address the head of the Cayville campus, the Mona campus, the St. Augustine campus, and the Open campus all at once, and to take questions from them and to be enlightened as to what is happening. We also met the students, many of whom had some concerns about our review of GATE, which is seemed to be getting ahead of itself in terms of the report being before the cabinet. And until that report is digested by the cabinet and cabinet considers the recommendations, while that is going on, there's some anxiety which we had to respond to. And we also had the opportunity to tour the facilities at Mona and to make some comparisons with what exists in Trinidad and Tobago, not just in servicing the students on the campus, but in servicing the nation of Jamaica. And we would have to look to see to what extent we are serviced in a similar way in Trinidad and Tobago. So that day out in Jamaica at Mona was extremely valuable. And of course, today I started off, had the opportunity of addressing the 22nd session of the Law of the Sea Conference in Jamaica. As you know, Jamaica is the home of the Law of the Sea Authority, which is the only major international body hosted in a developing country. And Trinidad and Tobago has been there at its birth. Those of you who know the name Lennox Balla would know that he was a former permanent secretary who became an expert in the law of the sea. And together with some other developing countries' experts, we did bring about this institution which is housed in Jamaica. And today was the conference where the Secretary General is being elected. And I did address that conference, outlining and reaffirming Trinidad and Tobago's commitment and involvement in it. And there's a communique which the Minister of Foreign Affairs would make available, because at the end of all of this in Jamaica, there was a joint communique which was signed by the Prime Minister of Jamaica and myself, outlining what we have addressed and what we are committed to. And that would give you a bit further insight into what is in front of us going forward. So basically, that was a summary of our 25-hour days for 4 days, and we all were pretty exhausted at the end. It wasn't helped by the losing of a match in Jamaica, because we would have preferred if we had won, but the team didn't win then, but we look forward to the finals. But it was a very useful trip, and I think by and large, the general sentiment in Jamaica, and hopefully here in Trinidad and Tobago, is that the intervention was necessary, it was timely, and it was successful. So if there are any questions, we take a few questions now before we move on.
Prime Minister, what about the larger question of the CSME? You touched on it a little bit, and reinvigorating that and seeing what sort of interregional increase in exports can take place.
Well, the Caribbean single market and economy, as you know, was a major assignment being worked upon at CARICOM and under the chairmanship of former Prime Minister Barbados Owen Arthur. And at some stage in the proceedings, the community seemed to have lost its appetite for the progress, and it was shelved to a date to be fixed. Recently, because Trinidad and Tobago understands the importance of the survival and growth of the CARICOM market, where we are a major supplier to that market, we took the initiative at the last heads of government meeting to put back on the agenda the whole question of the single market and economy. That initiative was very well received, and the prime ministers who are in office today have all agreed that the time has come for us to return to and revisit this whole effort of attempting to establish a single market and economy. However, what we have agreed to do in furtherance of that agreement of the heads is to ask the Secretariat to do a review and a presentation on this matter. In other words, where are we? What have we done? What is outstanding? What has been committed and not followed through it? and to present that at the heads meeting, which is due to take place in Guyana in February. So in February, there's going to be a full re-engagement of this single market and the economy. In the interim, the Secretariat would be preparing for that, that day when it comes back on the agenda for attention. There are a number of new prime ministers in the cohort of leaders at the moment, and many of them have openly expressed the desire to re-engage the single market and economy. If we have a proper single market and economy, doing what can be done, what we anticipate is that there will be growth in investment, there will be growth in the movement of goods and services, growth in employment, and the general wealth creation in the region. But it brings with it certain decisions that might have some consequences, which one can come to the conclusion that some territories are timid in responding to. And what has happened is that while the decisions might have been taken or the efforts were being made to go in a certain direction, the timidity has brought about some loss of enthusiasm. And that is now being re-engaged to see what we can do and what we cannot accomplish at this point in time. There's a general sentiment, and this came up in Jamaica in our discussions across the board at the UWI and with Jamaican government officials, that there's a lot to be had by us approaching our business with a view to regionalizing more things rather than fragmenting more things, and using the success of the University of the West Indies as an acceptance of standards which can apply to all of us. We can extend that template onto some other things like accreditation and certain law enforcement aspects of it. So when we go down that road, we will see what is doable.
Prime Minister, could you possibly expand a little bit on the discussions that you and Prime Minister Holness had on Jamaica, on Caribbean Airlines and the current relationship there? Is that relationship going to continue?
Well, it's not a matter of going to continue. As you know, when Caribbean Airlines, which is 100% Trinidad and Tobago owned at a particular point in time, acquired Air Jamaica under certain conditions. And one of those conditions was that Jamaica has a shareholding, I think it is 16%. Jamaica has a shareholding in Caribbean Airlines. So Caribbean Airlines is owned by Trinidad and Tobago, who has the majority, and Jamaica, the minority. It was raised in Jamaica that one of the expectations of that marriage or that merger or acquisition, whatever term you want to use, was that Caribbean Airlines would carry out certain kinds of services out of Jamaica into the source areas. And there is some thinking that we have not capitalized on that aspect of the arrangement. But we have made it clear to the Jamaicans that we don't expect that Jamaica would be a silent, non-participating partner in the business. So anything that Caribbean Airlines has to do along the lines of expanding its footprint or taking on additional responsibilities, that responsibility would not lie solely on the shoulders of the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago. But if there are opportunities for the airline, especially in the face of significant reduction in oil prices as compared to what transpired 2 years ago and so on, then we should take those opportunities and make them work for both countries and the region as a whole. And to do that, we said that we will subject ourselves at the level of the government and the airlines to proper technical assessments and not just vai jumping from here to there, because we want to ensure that this general sentiment now, which seems to be coming home to us, that there's a bit more appetite for a regional airline, where Caribbean Airline becomes the regional carrier of more than one nation, that if that is where you need to go, then those who are going to come with us will carry their responsibilities with them as well.
Could you, what about the, on the security issue, any specific security initiatives that TNT and Jamaica are looking at that came up in the discussion?
Not that we can talk about today, but certainly that our personnel will work more closely in ensuring that Jamaica knows what's happening with Trinidad and Tobago knows what's happening with Jamaica, and that we share all information that has the interest of securing both countries and anywhere else in the region for that matter. So closer cooperation is what we're hoping to get out of that.
Prime Minister, you spoke about several new prime ministers in the region. And
Is it 7? I didn't count them. I just said some.
several new prime ministers in the region, and the new life that they could bring to the CSME. In that context, could we expect any increase in the numbers of skilled workers and the categories of skilled workers who can move freely throughout the Caribbean to produce goods and services?
Well, that was an issue that was raised, and we in Trinidad and Tobago, already there are 10 areas of certification which would allow citizens to move relatively freely in the region. What we have agreed to do is to examine and review to see whether that number could be increased from 10 to maybe 11, 12, or 13, because there are some categories of persons who we are desirous of having easier movement to facilitate their involvement in development in the territories. And if they are not now listed, then a managed movement, and that is the phrase that we did agree on, a managed movement of such persons would be to the benefit of the countries who desire such persons to visit them. So what has been happening so far, even though we agreed on 10 persons, 10 categories, only 4 or 5 have been operationalized in Trinidad and Tobago. So we were asked to look at the other 4 or 5 that we have not been operationalizing to see whether we could advance that. And that was a discussion, that was part of the discussion.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, the decision to invite opposition members on this particular trip has been applauded by some. What was Mr. Ramada's contribution to the trip, and also, not financially, but I mean in terms of, knowledge-wise? And can we look forward to more members of the opposition being invited on state visits?
Mr. Ramada is a very experienced lawyer. He's a very experienced parliamentarian, and he's a member of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I can tell you, at critical moments in our discussions in Jamaica, his input is very valuable as a member of the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago.
So you spoke about the talks of the CSME. What about talks, if any, of the Caribbean Court of Justice? That has also been stalled throughout the territory.
Well, that too we discussed, and in Jamaica, the political support from one party is there, but there's also talk about a referendum on the matter, and there's still some difference of opinion there. The last government, which has a 1-seat minority in the parliament, has committed itself, but what is happening in Jamaica is the process by which that commitment can be executed. And I took it from our discussions that there's some examination of what the outcome is likely to be. But it's also something which may not be on the in slot number 1 on the front burner, because some other matters have overcome that in the meantime. However, we affirmed Trinidad and Tobago's position, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that we would like to see the CCJ as our final court of appeal in an original and appellate jurisdiction. So that is still a matter before us. What they couldn't understand is why we haven't done it, and that explanation is something well known to us.
Okay, and you wish to enlighten us a little bit more on the why we haven't gone forth with the CCJ?
Well, I mean, for it to happen, it has to have full parliamentary support, and the PNM does not have the votes in the parliament to do it, and others who had agreed to do it have changed their minds. So hopefully, with time, we may get there, but our positions are very clear.
Prime Minister, there was a part of my question that you forgot to answer. Can we look forward to more?
Maybe I'm a little tired on that part. What was the part?
Can we look forward to more members of the opposition accompanying the government on state visits?
Maybe not. I don't know. It all depends on the members of the opposition. If they're invited and they turn up, well, then so be it. If they don't turn up, well, they go without them.
Prime Minister, in your discussions, did you, two things. You spoke about UE and how UE Mona contributes to national life there. What did you see that you think can be implemented here? And did you you and your team explore any space for a further private sector export of goods from Trinidad into Jamaica?
Well, in our discussion with the business community, the general sentiment was that there are opportunities which we must maximize. And setting the legislation for establishment where with ease of establishment of businesses in each other's territories should be hassle-free, and to facilitate more investment, and the receipt of investment from one country into the other should be encouraged and not be a source of discord. Those are the kinds of discussions that we were getting positive vibes on, that we couldn't do these things without aggravating each other. And with respect to the first point you raised, there's one thing that I was particularly impressed with at UWI, at Mona, is the existence of a DNA lab, which is leading edge technology, run by the university, but providing a commercial service to the nation of Jamaica. That is something that Trinidad and Tobago would want to have a closer look at, because what it does, given what they have, is almost real-time responses to DNA matters. And you know how important that is in our crime fighting and security and other matters. And whereas in Trinidad and Tobago we've had tremendous delays in the court waiting for results and so on and so on. And I don't know until I see what we have here to compare it to what I've seen in Jamaica. I don't know that I can complete this enthusiasm that I have. But I do know that what I've seen in Jamaica is serving the Jamaican community very, very well, and it represents the best that we could do in the region. And if that kind of technology is available in Trinidad, it can contribute to a number of areas where we now aren't doing as good as we can.
Members of the media, as you heard the Prime Minister say a short while ago, it has been a very long and grueling week. We'll take one more question, and preferably from someone who didn't have a chance as yet. Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, can you tell us, were there any discussions between Jamaica and Trinidad with regards to the nationals who are being detained in Jamaica?
Yes, that we started out with that, but we were able to demonstrate that the few nationals from Jamaica who are detained, that the conditions under which they are detained, those conditions are very legal, and Jamaica accepts and understands that. The physical conditions are also made acceptable in the context that we are directed by CARICOM on our own national conditions, that persons of that circumstance should be treated with dignity. And we were able to report to the Jamaicans that we were not just talking these things, we had engaged in training of our staff, improvement in physical environments, repatriating a number of Jamaicans who had been processed after they overstayed their time and had been repatriated, and steps are being taken to repatriate many of the others who are now in detention. And that report was very well received in Jamaica.
I'd like
Question, can you say how many nationals are in Jamaica right now who are being detained?
Minister Moses might have that information more accurately. Our nationals in Jamaica? I am not aware that we have nationals detained in Jamaica. I was talking about Jamaicans in Trinidad. What I just told you applied to Jamaicans in Trinidad. I'm not aware that we have any
We do not have such figures, but what I can do is bring some measure of precision on the number of nationals of Jamaica who are currently housed detained here. It numbers around 40 persons, and over the last 2 weeks, about 15 detainees would have been released and would have regained, repatriated and would have regained their country of origin, Jamaica. And currently we have about 20 persons that have been processed and are waiting tickets to return to Jamaica.
members of the media,
Thank you very much. Thank you.